Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Dotson. I am the founder of Highland Park Poetry and your host today for Poetry Today. I am really excited. I've got two guests appearing virtually, Sandra Marchetti and Elizabeth Joy Levinson. Just as brief introduction, I'm going to introduce Sandra. She actually appeared, I think, on this show back in 2015. So it's been a few years. Sandra Marchetti is the author of two full-length poetry collections. Aisle 28 is her newest book from Stephen F. Austin State University Press that came out this year, as well as Confluence from Sundress Publications in 2015. She's also the author of 4 chapbooks of poetry and lyric essays. Sandra's poetry appears widely in Poet Lore, Blackbird, Ecotone, Southwest Review, Subtropics, and elsewhere. Her essays can be found at The Rumpus, Whiskey Island, Mid-American Review, Barrel House, Pleiades, and other venues. Sandy is a former poetry editor at River Styx magazine. She earned her MFA in creative writing in poetry from the George Mason University, and now serves as the coordinator of tutoring services at the College of DuPage in the Chicagoland area. Welcome, Sandra.
Hello. Actually, quick bio edit. I now work at Harper College, so closer
Oh,
to
goodness. Okay, so sorry.
Must have sent you an old bio.
All right, well, we'll be sure to update that on our website. Thank you so much for coming back to join us with your new book, huzzah! And then let me also introduce our other guest, Elizabeth Joy Levinson. Is a biology teacher in Chicago. Her work has been published in Whale Road Review, Swim, Cobra Milk, Anti-Heroin Chic, and others. She's the author of 2 chapbooks, As Wild Animals from Dancing Girl Press and Running Aground from Finishing Line Press. And she's very proud to share her first full-length collection, Uncomfortable Ecologies, that was recently published by Unsolicited Press. She is, as she says in her bio, a high school teacher, and we are going to be subject to some high school experience in the fact that I think the bell may ring in the midst of this recording, so just prepare everybody. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us today as well.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess the reason why we're meeting these 2 authors is because they are both our featured poets at our upcoming reading, which is scheduled for Saturday, November 11th at 4 p.m. And that, because we're Highland Park Poetry is a bit of a gypsy organization at the moment, we're this time going to be at the Guild Hall at Trinity Episcopal Church, located in Highland Park. There is a $5 cover, and there's an poetry open mic after the features read. Poets may bring up to 3 pieces. So let's get to the questions. Sandy, talk to us about your new book, Aisle 228.
Sure. So Aisle 228, I have a copy here. This is a book about listening to baseball on the radio, going to games with my father, and the Chicago Cubs, really. So in some ways, people might view it as a memoir in verse. I think that a lot of times we talk about how the speaker of a poem is different than the author of a poem. And with this book, there really isn't a lot of difference between those things, right? These experiences, for the most part, happened to me. And kind of, I look at some moments, and some of these moments might not be the ones that you're thinking of traditionally if you're a Cubs fan, as highlights in the history of the team. Some of them might be, and sort of like there are poems in there that kind of trace the history of baseball over the last 70 years, and kind of are really talking about the game in ways that we're often told as poets maybe we shouldn't talk about subjects. So I think part of the collection is playing with nostalgia and maybe even sentimentality and trying to do something different with those emotions. But while at the same time acknowledging that they're real. So I encourage you, if you're a Cubs fan, to pick up the book, or if you're not, but maybe thinking you want to read something that's maybe different than your typical poetry collection, I think you'd enjoy it.
Great. And I seem to recall, now I didn't go back and listen to our old interview from 2015, I think, but have you been working on these poems for since back then? Or was this a new thing? Maybe just in the interview you mentioned that you were a baseball fan. So.
No, I'm a third generation Cubs fan. So I've been a Cubs fan pretty much all my life, and I've been going to games for all my life. And I think that really this book had been brewing for probably about 10 years.
Okay.
So after I finished my first collection, which you were gracious enough to have me on to talk about, I think that this book basically was something that I knew that I would always write. I knew that I'd probably always write a book about the Cubs and, baseball on the radio and things like that. And the poems had been brewing for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that once I finished with that initial collection and got that published, I decided, okay, it's time. And then that sort of coincided, about a year into writing the poems, it sort of coincided with the team becoming really competitive and popular in new ways, right? And winning a World Series. And so then there was more to write about, right?
Yes.
But it's been a real journey to get this thing out into the world. And I think it's because it's difficult to find that poetry publisher that's also that sports fan that'll be,
right.
Interested enough to understand the references and think that also, okay, there might be an audience for this. So, yeah. So I've definitely been thinking about this book for a long time and working on it for just as long at this point.
Okay.
So I'm very proud it's finally found a home.
You know what? This might be a good opportunity, since we've been talking about your book, for you to read one of the poems from the collection.
Yes, I'd be more than happy to. Okay. I think I'll start at the beginning. This poem is the first poem in the book, and it's called Frame. And actually seeing this poem in print sort of buoyed my ambitions to keep going with this book. Frame. Tucked in the western grandstand, imagine Wrigley. A sliver of light, orange-green beams, gone between golden arches as scoreboard plates clink in place. The fourth inning haze filters the sun, a yoke yawning itself undone in the upper deck air to curve against each pillar, straining my gaze in aisle 228. My father gripes and wipes his nose through the April game, the team terrible again. Yet players lope over this green hill, and our minds agree to rise and clap for them.
All right. Thank you so much. And now I think Elizabeth, I'd like to talk about your book for a moment. And then I guess we'll go back and forth with questions. But Elizabeth, tell me about Uncomfortable Ecologies.
Sure. Here's a copy of it. So this was also, I think, Sandra, you said it was about a 10-year project, and I would say this was also took me about 10 years to really finish it and figure out where it wanted to go. But I'd say that the book really does focus on the theme of ecologies being relationships. There are a lot of poems that are definitely what you would think would be in the book, eco poems. I write a lot about the environment, but I'm also writing about my own relationship to place, and then just, human relationships. So it starts off mostly dealing with themes of nature, eco-poetry, but then it moves into more human to human relationships as the book continues. And ecologies of, not just land, but ecologies of class, ecologies of poverty, ecologies of addiction. So not a light book, but yeah, and also trying to, not just explore the tensions, but, the the beauty of those tensions, like where there's good stuff in there too. So yeah.
Wow. Okay. And tell me about the journey for getting this book published. Was it a different experience than from your chapbooks?
Yeah, I got really lucky. Didn't, I mean, I sent it out to quite a few publishers in a short period of time, but I found Unsolicited Press, and they just had like an open call, and it was like a $5 reading fee, and I'm like, all right, let me just try this one, and yeah, and they picked it up, and they've been really great to work with, but with the chapbooks, I would say. Um, I tried contests. I tried a lot of contests with the chapbooks, and like my second chapbook was one where, it didn't place in the contest, but they accepted it for publication, like that kind of thing. And with the book, I ended up saying I'm not going to try the contest route, and just did open calls, and that's how I found Unsolicited. And yeah, they've been wonderful.
Oh, good. Well, you know what? I might be heading in that direction too. I've been working on my third poetry collection, and I feel like I've just started sending it out to different contests, and it's just like I'm buying a very expensive lottery ticket, you know. Oh well. I guess, someone's got to win. Why can't it be me? Right. Why don't you talk to me about your inspirations for the book?
Yeah,
or
so
for your writing in general?
Oh, sorry. I moved around a lot growing up, so place was something that I always noticed because we lived in lots of different places, and I think those images really stuck with me, and resonated, and that's what sticks with you. That's what we explore in our writing, right? So yeah.
Cool.
I think yeah.
And then I was going to ask, I know that you work with students, and you mentioned in our conversation before we started taping that you are sort of like the facilitator for the school's poetry club. How is it? I mean, do you have any tips that you give to your students when they're writing, or?
It's funny because, so I've got two chapbooks and I've got a book, but when I'm in front of my students, I'm just like Miss Levinson, their science teacher. So giving them tips doesn't always go over, but I have been able to bring in a partnership with Young Chicago Authors, and we have like teaching artists that come in, and I use a lot of their curriculum, and it's really beautiful stuff that the students love, and I also love. Like, I write with my students, and so I think less about like me being able to give my students advice. It's more that I go through the process with them, and I think that helps them to see that even though I've published things, like I still have to do the same brainstorming, the same writing prompts that they have to do in order to come up with work. So I think that is where I'm able to help them out the most. And it's a really great community for me, not just working with my students, but working with the teaching artists at YCA and the community of educator writers that try to help foster that in their schools.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Sandra, I wanted to ask you, you're also working with students, although at the college level. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the name of the college that you're working with? Whoops. Did we lose Sandra?
No, she's muted.
Oh, she's muted. Sandra,
here.
can you unmute yourself?
I hate to tell you this because it's in the recording, but I'm having tremendous audio issues. On my side, it's not your fault. So you were asking me about the students that I work with, and was there an opportunity for me to give them any advice about writing? Is that kind of
yes,
where
yeah.
we're going? Okay, thank you. So I think, the students that I work with, I manage student tutors. And so some of them are writing tutors. Most of them are work in STEM or STEAM, subjects. But I think really something important that I can talk to them about, regardless of their discipline, is just that idea of observation. right? And that is really something that, whether you're, many of them are going to be engineers, some of them are going to work in other fields. Like, this is something that's important for all of them, is to kind of think about, okay, what we're learning and talking about now, and what you're seeing in the students, and even the way you think about material and how you make things make sense to you may be different than someone else. And some of that starts with just the way you're looking at things. And instead of necessarily trying to streamline things, or why can't I learn the same way anybody else does, like, part of being a poet is understanding kind of the beauty and the uniqueness in one's perspective. And I really encourage them to use that when they work with students, is just to sort of say, okay, you're not an educator, you're not a teacher, but what can you learn and see from your experiences? Like, maybe that funny little note-taking method that you came up with is the thing that will help them, even though it seems so weird to you, So, and then the other great thing about my job and how it relates to poetry is just the material. Like, I learn about the chambers of the heart. I get to learn about centripetal force. I get to learn about all these amazing things. I get little mini lectures every time I observe them, and that stuff goes into my poems. So.
Oh, yeah. Right. A good source for material, always. You know what? I realized now that I forgot, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. I forgot to ask you if you could read us a poem from your collection.
Sure. I'm going to read one of the early poems in the book. And there's a reference in here to the Cornell boxes at the Art Institute, so I just want to point that out. Home. Today, I want to curl up inside one of these Cornell boxes, to be the thing with feathers or the facsimile of something other that, even in paper decoupage, could conjure the tickle, the soft chill down your spine as you imagine each twig carried swiftly, each bit of thread, each patch of fur held lightly in a hard beak that could break open the beetle's shell or the banded case of an acorn, that could snap the neck of a tiny mouse or crack the shell of another's egg, but doesn't, and instead tucks itself into your hand, tiny beak tucked under wing.
Oh, wow. Nice. And I get sort of an idea of what a Cornell box is, but can you describe that, what these boxes are? Are they just like cases with the preserved birds, or?
So that's a reference to the artist, Joseph Cornell, and he has these different like collage pieces that the Art Institute houses, and some of them are like birdhouses, but then instead of actual birds, there's pictures, or there's feathers, or there's like a bit of straw attached to them, and there's a whole series of them that they have on display. Cool. Next time you're at the Art Institute, it's really wonderful. It's in the modern wing now, so.
Okay, well, I'll definitely have to check that out. I guess, let's see. I was going to ask, do you have an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Yeah. I mean, that's, well, for me, I think I started writing when I was really young, and I realized that was something that I could take with me. So I went to like 10 different schools by the time I was in high school. But if I wrote something, and, like a notebook was something I could take with me, or an idea, right? Mm-hmm. Like language was something that was mine once I had it. So yeah.
Cool. And then, okay, and here's an oddball. As a writer, what would you choose as your mascot or avatar or spirit animal, whatever you want to call it?
Can it just be all the animals?
Can you limit it to 2, maybe?
I like insects, so I'm gonna have to go with invertebrates.
That's a big category. Is there a particular characteristic that appeals to you? The industry,
Yeah, discovery.
okay,
Discovery. Like,
Sounds
you know, you
good.
can go in your backyard any day and find an insect that you've never seen before, but it's been there your whole life.
Interesting. You know, I have a friend who lives in the state of Maryland, and she has I guess, a camera with a gigantic lens, and that's what she does. She likes to. I literally go into her backyard and take photographs, and then I think she works with like a volunteer group that helps identify species or whatever, and so like then she'll find out this was the first time this bug was photographed in the state of Maryland or whatever. It's fascinating stuff, and the photographs are incredible. It's hard to get them to pose, but I guess sometimes you get lucky, right? Okay. All right. Going back to Sandy, I guess I'd like to find out if your answer to that first question was, what was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Yeah, so I was an only child, and I think there are a lot, or I still am, I guess. I think there are a lot of children who ask a lot of questions, right? But for me, I was a very curious kid, and I did have both of my parents to my disposal for, at varying degrees. And I learned that asking for something got me somewhere, typically.
Okay.
And I learned that expressing my opinion, I was really, for the most part, listened to. So for me, like, verbally communicating, I think, was probably the first part of that. And then, like, when I was very young, I came in second. I was never the one who won contests. Even to this day, I don't win. I never win. But like, I came in second or third in this short story contest, and I really enjoyed making this little book with orange yarn, like, as binding for it. And I was like, oh, I'm getting recognized for making this book across my school district or whatever. So it was it was really very sweet, and it helped me to realize, okay, I might have a talent here.
Um, okay, that I guess I would segue. What do you think of as good poetry? How do you define good poetry?
Yeah, question. Like, I think.
I mean, that's a very
really
personal
Yeah.
question.
I guess I'll just start off with sort of the prickly answer, which is that I am super picky. Like, I'm gonna own it. Like, I think most folks in poetry today are very kind, and they're like so generous. Like, they love everything, and they want to encourage everything. And my tastes are very picky. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. So for me, a good poem is really a well-crafted poem. Like, I don't really, like, if I find out that a poem was written yesterday, sent to a literary magazine, and it's in my slush pile, like, it's gonna bias me. I think that well-written poems are revised
Yeah.
poems.
Right.
Where I can see some evidence of craft. But I don't think of myself as the omniscient reader. Like, I definitely don't know everything. And I think that it is important for me to be open to something that I don't necessarily like. I don't think well-written or good poems are necessarily ones that I like. I think about it the same way as in, like, an art history class when you're taught art criticism. Like, you don't have to like it, but you can find the merit there, or you can find the reasoning, and I do think, like, I like to poke the bear and talk about subjects that you're not supposed to, like I mentioned earlier, and I don't think talking about sentimentality or nostalgia or love or anything makes a poem bad. It's just about, like, are you attacking it from an angle where you can make people care about that thing again? It's the same thing. I write a lot of actually eco poetry as well. That's sort of my other thing. And, like, it's really hard to write a poem that people can take seriously about a flower or a bird. And I think those are some of the hardest subjects to actually talk about. So if you can do it well, like, you've really done something in my book. So.
Yes. I think we've got time for one more poem from you, Sandy.
Sure.
Sandra? Sorry.
You're fine. Okay, I will give a poem that's completely different from the last,
Okay.
last one. This is called Denouement, and if you've ever walked out of a stadium after a game, you've experienced this particular type of denouement. Beer on the bricks and cheap meat, piss that brines the seats and the frame as we exit the park at the end of the game. A dozen doors thwack open, dull as scrapped cups. Through the clatter, a popcorn vendor crams his bags in the trash. We meet in a square of air below the stairs to curse and bless, socked in sweat. Hands grind on tunnel walls, slathered in mustard and ads, shuffle us from the cube in sun, ants pressed away from the day.
All right, thank you. I like your your subtle use of rhyming sort of within the lines, not not like an end rhyme thing, cadence, but within the lines.
Bit of assonance, a little bit of consonance.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Elizabeth, do you have one more to share with us as well?
Yeah, and there's a number of poems in the book that have the same title, Home, and so I'm going to read the last home poem in the book if I can find it. I thought I just had it. Okay, all right, and I think I've got time before the bell goes off again. Okay. Home. At 38, my younger sister has started collecting olive shells, however many she can find. Their lettered and netted shapes litter her shelves. They spill out of plastic boxes, Ziploc bags, and mason jars. How hard a thing it is to hold on to a place to say, I live here and I am of here. How does a person come to belong? I've rested the skull of a house sparrow in my attic office. Is home the place you bury your dead? House sparrows are from Europe. There they are disappearing. Here they flourish, they outcompete. I have olive shells too. They're incoherent script like electrocardiograms, but nothing lives inside anymore. Only the memory of the body it once carried and the memory of the bodies they carried beneath the sand where they held their prey close until it was absorbed. I run my thumb over the smooth outer lip, over the sharp edges of the crowning spiral. I ask my husband if he knows what to do with me when I die. Somewhere in this house, I have a garfish scale. Somewhere, I have a butterfly pinned up in a frame.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you so much. Well, I hope that this conversation will entice people to want to hear more of you reading, both of you. Elizabeth and Sandra will be at the Guildhall of Trinity Episcopal Church on Saturday, November 11th, starting at 4 p.m. You will be able to hear them read more of their poetry, as well as purchase copies of their books. I bet if you ask, they'll even sign them for you, so come on down. And then after that, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a poetry open mic, and poets are able to bring up to 3 pieces. There is a $5 cover to help us take care of the rental for the venue. But anyway, thank you to my guests Sandra Marchetti and Elizabeth Joy Levinson for joining me today. And we really look forward to hearing you both read in person in November. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.